My panelists for this next session, I would like to invite Aya Zagnin, who is a early stage investor, Pan Africa, and we also have Marem Dieng, the Africa lead for 500 Global. They will be joining me for a discussion on startup acceleration and angel investment in Africa's tech ecosystem. Ladies, the stage is awaiting you, as am I. Thank you for joining us, Aya. It's
Good
wonderful
afternoon.
to have you here.
Thank you for everyone.
So we've had a lot of, I understand that you're based in Morocco, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we had a huge announcement just before 10X started, which was the signing ceremony for GITEX Global doing its debut edition in Morocco in May of next year, which was huge. This room was packed. We had a lot of media, a lot of excitement about the Moroccan startup ecosystem, and I think how Morocco is positioned somewhat advantageously and similarly to Dubai. So perhaps we can start our discussion from there, and Marem should hopefully join us soon. I think she pulled a disappearing act. My questions were not that hard, Marem, if you can hear me. Let's start with, so earlier today in the signing ceremony, and from the research that I did, there's been a lot of buzz about the actual pace and scale that startup investment has taken in Africa. This year, there is the African Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, which projected that startup investment in Africa will come to the tune of about $7 billion US by the end of the year. We're already at $3.5 billion. But for the same time, like last year, we were only at 5.2 billion at the end of 2021. So if we can just look at those figures for a second, paint a picture for me. There she is, ladies and gentlemen, Marem Dieng, looking very fashionable. A round of applause, please. I said fashionable, not fashionably late. Welcome. So as I was just speaking with Aya about the scale and the buzz that the startup investment numbers out of Africa are making in the news, projected to hit 7 billion US at the end of this year. Take us through, I would love perspective from both of you for our audience. Take us through what's changing on the continent to, I think, create that kind of velocity, on the ground, that we're actually seeing those numbers, folks signing those degrees of checks. Tell us what's happening in Africa.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We didn't go through a round of introduction, but I guess our names and all the slide, everything is clear. So investments in Africa, it has been quite a hot topic, and we're quite excited. I gotta tell you, the growth is amazing. We're growing. We're quite bullish on the startup ecosystem. So actually, what really sparked the growth in Africa is mostly the regulation change, mostly the awareness, mostly fundraising actually coming. Local investors started investing more into Africa. Apart from the foreign investors, a lot of people are seeing Africa as the future of the startup ecosystem in the world, which is clear because the growth rate of Africa is actually much better than the growth rate around the world. As part of what I do, apart from the tech ecosystem, so I'm an investment banker by full-time job. So I work also in Africa and the other, emerging regions like Latin America and South Asia, and we work for impact sectors like infrastructure and everything else. And I gotta tell you, even for my full-time job, the best returns we hit them in our regions. Like in Africa, for example, we can hit a 5 times quite easier now than we used to, when we hit in the US, etc. I consider Africa being at the growth stage. Most of the regions now matured quite a little bit. So as investors, we want to follow the regions that are actually in the growth stage. Now, needless to say, there are a lot of challenges, of course, with a region like this. A lot of things are just starting. The infrastructure is not quite good. The regulation also is not quite good. But we're still bullish because things are changing, at least specifically in the big 4 markets, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. And everything is actually going smoother, quite bullish again.
Thank you, Aya. Marem, your perspective. How long has 500 been in Africa, actually?
We've actually been investing since 2012. So we've been present in the market for a while now. And I think, in addition of the few things that Aya just mentioned, one of the most important things that we actually have started to do is we've started to count. data reporting is something that did not used to happen in the startup ecosystem on the continent. And for the first time now, for the last 3 to 4 years, we've been collecting data. So we have comparables that actually allow us now to be able to understand progress. And you cannot measure something that you don't have insight on. So I think that from a just a pure factual perspective, we've actually started to measure insights and data into the ecosystem. So today we can say that we are improving at X rate. So I think that's one of the first things. I think the second one, which is also quite important when you're looking at it from an investment dynamic perspective, is that the ecosystem is starting to grow because now there is actually interest pouring into the ecosystem in terms of capital, but also in terms of momentum from a founder perspective. We're investing now in an economy where we are seeing startups. And that is also something that's important to note. You cannot invest into startups if you don't find startups. And today, more so than ever, we're seeing tech entrepreneurship be actually of momentum. And we are seeing that there are increasing founders who are building tech-driven companies. Which, by the way, I think it's important to say that the continent has never lacked entrepreneurship. Africa is actually one of the most entrepreneurial places in the world, but it's mainly SME-driven traditionally. And now, today, we're finally seeing it be traditionally driven and tech-driven. So I think that that's the second point that I will make. And then the third one, which I think that we can all relate to, is for the first time we're also seeing success stories. And success stories are incredibly important in motivating growth. It's very difficult to be able to actually envision what success would look like on the continent if you've never seen a company raise more than $100 million, or if you've never seen an exit, or if you actually have never seen a company get to a valuation of $1 billion. So all those things are incredibly affecting the way that we are now perceiving the ecosystem, which is the way we see it.
So we're seeing folks paving the way, which I think works as the narrative then becomes a magnet for more folks to decide to be entrepreneurs. Actually, to your point, it was announced earlier today or at the signing ceremony, the discussion about there being 6 unicorns coming out of Africa, 4
Nine.
of them, 9? Okay, besides the 6, and 4 of them just last year making it to unicorn status. So seeing that happen, those success stories make a huge difference. Tell me about, like, from both of your lens. Now you are an early stage investor. Let's say you have the perspective of an angel, because we talked about it before, and you would have the VC hat. Can you tell me from the supply side, the capital, provision side of things, how has that changed, in Morocco? We have in developed ecosystems, for example, angels over a period of time, the more experienced they are, the more their networks become more enmeshed, you start to see syndicates form, that kind of professionalization and maturation of angels. On the VC side, you have VCs now essentially having entire consulting advisory arms because they will advise their founders and investees on everything from recruitment to marketing. Are you starting to see some of that in Africa as well?
Yes, I think I can perhaps start. So yes, we have started seeing some maturation in terms of the availability of capital in the very early stage for African entrepreneurs, which is actually quite evidenced by a lot of angel investors. And my most favorite, like the tech entrepreneurs turned investors, which are actually quite a lot of them in Africa currently. Specifically, those unicorn founders that you have actually found out. Quite a good story. Most of the unicorn founders are turned angel investors as well, so they keep supporting, the small startups going forward. I'm actually quite excited specifically about the amount of angel syndicates going on, and also the fact that angel investors are educating themselves now more. So we started also seeing angels and VCs kind of mixing together, coming together in order to understand how the VCs would actually come out. Because as angels, our exits technically in Africa specifically is going to be secondaries to VCs and to other ones.
But then aren't angels and VCs too at some level also competing for the best deals?
Some level, sorry?
Aren't some of you competing for the best deals? Because
Hopefully,
competing, no.
so how collaborative can you be when you're also competing and you want to come in, at an advantageous position?
We're actually coming, like we're kind of co-investing, like it's nothing really competition, because in the same time, we fetch the best deals, and we come in at a much earlier stage, usually than most of the investors. So, as angel investors, we come in mostly at the idea stage. or at the pre-seed stage. Why so? Because we're really looking at the best valuation, and we give a lot of work to our startups. So technically, we're your first believers. So we come in really early. We try to work with the company to reach the point to actually go to a VC. Actually, we're very collaborative. We kind of have all of our startups together. We try to meet VCs and see what they're looking for, what are the trends. We try to work with our startups to do so. I actually always try to encourage open conversations, and we're having a lot of events actually between angels and VCs that discuss, those matters. I wouldn't consider it competitive at all, specifically in Africa, because what we do is really try to help each other and help the ecosystem from different ways. However, you might have noticed in Africa that we have more seed to Series A VCs than Series B plus.
But that would be reflective of the ecosystem and the startups in it, correct?
Yes, exactly. It's reflective of the ecosystem, but in the same time, it just, the access of capital to startups at Series B and Series C, etc., has been quite far-fetched. Mainly because the exit market in Africa is not as developed as we want it to be. I would consider it work in progress. Mainly the companies or the investors who come in at Series B plus are more, development financial institutions, DFIs. We have also now some foreign private equity investors. But again, when we want to exit M&A or rather IPO, we usually do it abroad. It's a work in progress. We're still developing that market, but at this point, for us, the best thing to do as angels is to come in really early, take more risk, invest, help, assist, grow the companies, build them for the VCs to come in and find a good pipeline. You mentioned Morocco, for example. Now, in Morocco, I do have an experience there. I'm not sure if you're aware of the version of Shark Tank of Morocco. So last season, I was actually part of the Sharks. And it wasn't really a good experience, I would have to say, because the quality of startups was really limited because we don't have a lot of angel investors supporting them. So for me as an angel, I try to I go with the mindset that money might be lost, but the most important thing here is that you're building companies for the VCs actually to take over at some point.
But you're also building the funnel, right? Because angels come in after what they say the family, friends, and fools round, basically. So you come in, and then based on who you're writing checks for, you start to create that initial funnel of ideas, of companies that then go on to, as they grow, perhaps start courting VCs for, in theory, the bigger checks that VCs can offer, and perhaps the strategic advice that VCs are also known for. So then what I wanted to ask you is, since you just said, and I'd love Marem to come in as well too, you're saying the quality of startups was low. So how much of that, again, is a factor of, as angels, you're automatically a filter, correct, for the startups that are moving along? Have you seen that improve in your own experience?
Like the filtering process?
Yeah, the kind of startups that you're seeing,
yes.
that you're
so,
connecting with.
Not to say that the quality is low. One thing I want to tell everybody, that Africa is resilient, and African founders are hustlers. I'm telling you, even for my experience with entrepreneurs, for example, we don't have electricity in some places. A lot of founders have to get out actually and pay electricity bills for their employees to even sleep well. We don't have infrastructure. For example, if you speak about e-commerce or logistics, you have to have a road to actually have a logistics company, and roads do not exist in most of Africa. So African founders actually are met with 10 times the problems that any other founder in the world, and I can actually vouch for it for my own experience with our founders. Needless to speak about all the illnesses, malaria, and everything that actually touches them all the time. So when I say the quality is low, I mean that they don't really get the learning and exposure that some other, in other regions. So our role as angel investors doesn't only come with giving the money, walking away, because there's always money around the table. There are family offices, there's the family and friends. But our role really is to help them build and help them understand and get them to, like an accelerator, for example, like 500 Global, like get them together. Like
There's a lot of education that needs to
exactly.
happen still.
It's more
at
like an
that early
education
stage.
thing.
Okay.
Get them on track.
Marem, anything to add there on that?
Well, I think I am.
Especially because
take the
500
time
has
to-
been there for 10 years now.
Yeah. So we've been investing on the continent now since 2012, and I think something that's important to keep in mind, and I think she mentioned it quite well, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is growing just as much as the VC ecosystem is growing and is learning, right? It's a learning curve and a learning progress at the moment in terms of how do we create the appropriate VC funnel for founders to be successful. And today, angels are supposed to come in earlier, but also I think something that we don't mention enough is that you shouldn't be choosing an investor just because of the amount of capital that they're putting on the table, because an investor's role is not just to put cash in the bank, right? They are also supposed to position you strategically, make sure that they are presenting you to other potential investors and making sure that they're basically guiding you as you're building governance, as you're building structure, as you're scaling, as you're learning how to basically think about exit. And a lot of VCs on the continent are also learning that because they haven't done it yet. So rightfully so, it's an ongoing progress work, and a lot of founders and VCs are currently learning together. And I think that there is a lot of merit to be given to local angels and local VCs because they are building some of that foundation. But the truth is, there is a lot of work to be done, and there is still a lot of improvement to be done from an investor perspective, because our job should be to make sure that we are setting founders for success. If we are only able to provide capital, then we're not fully doing our job.
So if I could jump in, then what would be like 2 or 3 of those key learnings for investors? And if you could probably just wear a general investor hat, what do you think needs to change so that maybe for not for next year, but the year after that, we're looking at, I don't know, 14 billion?
I think one that I find very important and that comes top of mind as the first point would be, as investors, we need to make sure that we are preparing founders to have better cap tables. And I have seen some early stage cap tables that are quite cannibalizing, where investors and angels have come in taking almost 40% of a company for a small check and only thinking basically about the short-term outcome of this transaction. But what's going to happen is once this company is trying to raise Series A and Series B, no growth investor is going to enter a cap table that looks like that. Even if the company has a market fit, even if the company is growing, even if the company has scale progress. Because when you also think about it from a returns perspective as an investor, your investment needs to make sense. So one of the things that early stage African investors have to be working on and thinking about is how do we actually think of cap tables from a long-term perspective and making sure that we are investing in terms that will be profitable to founders on the long term as well as to ourselves first. Second, the idea of, and I think she mentioned it earlier, the idea of this competition among early stage investors. There is not enough capital on the continent at this moment for us to be having the type of competition that you would find in Silicon Valley. So it's very important for early stage investors to have points of collaboration. We need to work together, especially because we are covering a 1.4 billion people market within 54 countries with so many different languages and so many different market adaptations. We need to be able to work together. We cannot be all running behind the same deals because that's not viable, not to the market or to the founders. And then the last piece that I think is also quite important, and we really have to think about it on the long term as well, is when you're investing in a company, you have to be able and have a setup that allows you to dedicate time to the founders. You're not just putting cash, again. So you need to be able to dedicate time. And if you cannot dedicate time, you need to also make that expectation very clear to the founders from the beginning. And I've seen a lot of founders who have investors who just have not the capacity to dedicate time to them because they have too many portfolio companies. And again, it's only a symptom of the fact that the ecosystem is growing, and that's where we need to work a little bit closer with founders to set better expectations so that we can actually set better long-term returns.
Okay, so if I want to, and I saw Aya reacting in the beginning when you talked about cap tables, so I want to know what that smirk was about. But is it fair to say, like you said, because we don't have enough capital in the continent, perhaps as much as we like, because more capital breeds, again, competition, and in essence, competition improves an ecosystem, right? We're all pulling our bootstraps up, we're all trying to outwit or outsmart the other and better ourselves and better the deals we're putting in front of founders. In essence, how can we then start seeing, to you, like systemically, how can we unlock that kind of capital into the continent Are you seeing that improving at all in the last couple of years?
So I think there's definitely a progress road. So I think we've made progress since where an investment started really picking up around 2011, 2010. So there's been a lot of improvement across the continent. But I think realistically, in order to create that healthy competition that we're talking about, we need to be thinking about value proposition. And value proposition can only also be countered by founders' expectations. If a founder is expecting from an investor to come in with a full value prop, that in itself will increase the healthy type of competition that is needed in an ecosystem for now VCs to be able to look at how do they bring value. And I think that this is one of those kind of supply-demand dynamic where it has to come from the founders. And it has to be the founders who are not just thinking about the idea of getting quick money, but really sitting down and thinking about, if I do believe this is going to be $1 billion company, and I'm basically going to be working on this for the next 10 years, do I want to be working with this company, with this firm, and what can they bring for the 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 10 years that they're with me? So I think it really has to come from that.
Okay, so you're saying the onus falls on the founders. And having spoken to a lot of founders as a journalist, and actually literally this morning at the signing ceremony, there was a gentleman, an entrepreneur from Morocco, who said, I've registered my company in the US. I find that in Africa, it's so hard to be able to get in front of quality investors and quality angels and literally ask the ministry, can you please bring VCs from Europe at JITEX? So this was, and he made a very open claim. And I want to, what you're saying about the quality of deals is also reflective of what's happening here in this region, because there are enough founders who say, I know I'm not getting the best deal, but I'm at a stage where I've been working on my idea for X number of years. I really need to get this thing in motion and then, hopefully grow it so I can bring on another kind of more marquee investor on board. But again, like you said, if you're not in an advantageous position to start off with, you're shooting yourself in the foot in terms of attracting that kind of grade A investor down the line. So it's like a chicken and egg situation, because you're saying the onus is on the founder, and the founders are saying, no, we need you investors we need different investors.
Because of how early the market is, and you pointed out really well, it is a chicken and egg, and that's why both parties need to be working on this, and we need to continue to challenge ourselves as investors, and we need to continue trying to be proactive in also opening up these forums of discussions so that we can basically better figure out how to push back the dynamic, because it is not on the founders' fault, and at the same time, it is part of their dynamic to push. And on the investor side, especially for African investors, I think that they have the merit of at least being able to be locally active and local investing. So we can't also put all the blame on them, but at the same time, it is also part of their dynamic to create value prop. So that's also part of why we like to continue to talk about ecosystem building, because it's not just about investing in founders. It's also about how do you create the right environment and how do you create the right channels of both communications and forums so that we can better support founders, but also so that we can better understand what needs to change. Because the continent is doing great, there is growth, but that doesn't mean that we cannot structure as we go. And that doesn't mean that we cannot change and tweak things in order to make it more competitive.
Aya, do you have anything to add?
Okay. So perhaps I can talk a little bit more about the experience that the founder actually mentioned. So the founder is Moroccan. One thing that I really want to point is that the startup ecosystem in Africa is quite different from region to region. For example, you go to Morocco, we don't have a lot of angel investors there. We go to Egypt, it's totally different thing. Egypt is attracting a lot of investors, Nigeria, Kenya. So you see a lot of founders in the underrepresented Africa, meaning that the Africa's least developed countries, I'm speaking about Ethiopia, Sudan, Morocco, even I would call it a little bit underrepresented. French-speaking Africa now is picking up, but it was underrepresented. So most of the entrepreneurs there, because of the lack of capital, and also because of the lack of accelerator programs and education, they do feel that they have been let go, that nobody is caring for them, that the deals that they get are not good. But I want to say a little bit more about the deals that we give, because you spoke about the cap table, Mareme, which is I'm quite happy that you mentioned that, because I've seen that a lot. So the cap table for a lot of early stage, companies from our side, a lot of times you'll see it's not balanced. For example, for the underrepresented Africa, the risk is much higher. So investors come in as an early stage investor. A lot of them actually come in and they say, oh, you know what, I'm taking risk for you. I'm giving you 50K, but you need to give me 20% or 30% of your company, which I've seen a lot actually going on. The reason for them is that they're taking the risk, but then you're diluting the founder. The founder at some point, he's just gonna have enough. I mean, why is he working full time and you're just there as an investor? So not all investors are angels. Just to be said, not all early stage investors are angels. Like one has to really see the deal and its merit and kind of see how everything is. What I like about Africa now is that there are a lot of accelerator programs. It's quite interesting, actually. IBM, Facebook, Google, all of them jumped into the African opportunity from terms of acceleration. So we see a lot of opportunity. 500 startups actually is one of them. We see a lot of opportunity. We come in to educate people. So I actually suspect in the next 2-3 years, when the batches of education is actually done, we're going to have a huge, it's going to boom. Actually, it's going to boom like crazy. And I also want to mention that in H2 of this year, compared to the last year, Africa's fundraising have grown for about 30%, in comparison to a decline in Europe and a decline in Latin America of more than 43% compared to last year. What does this show us? That we are resilient. And also we have a lot of issues structurally that we cannot stop funding companies. Our whole digital economy basically is based on it. So I just wanted to make sure that there's really some importance here. One last point, because it's actually quite important. So in terms of really attracting investors, Africa always went to the West, means Europe and the US. We also have China coming in all the time actually to invest, but we haven't seen a lot of the Middle East, which is actually one of the reasons why I'm here, in Dubai, to be honest. So I really think that we are closer to the Middle East. The Middle East only know Egypt because of the culture, but I really wanted to show how big the opportunity is in sub-Saharan Africa, also for Middle Eastern investors, and try to get some funding going, to our side, because in terms of return, it's going to be really one of the highest in the world, and we're quite bullish in its house.
Okay, and perhaps GITEX in Africa will end up being one of those channels bringing in Middle Eastern investors too, I imagine. Yeah. I wanted to turn to the audience really quickly before I wrap this up. Do we have any questions for our panelists?
The reason I'm asking the question is that I come from a place where the market size is too small and we're starting in Africa rather in our local country. So how do you react to such a move where a co-founding team comes to Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, to start their company over there without any local co-founders on the team, but a perfect understanding of the market as well?
Where are you from? I didn't hear that.
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
So I think that from I have two sides of this answer. The first one is I still do believe that it's very important to have local resources in a team. And that doesn't necessarily mean a local founding team, but I think that there are certain, and it's just not about understanding the market, but there are certain things about building local relationships and being able to get through certain aspects of the local environment that only local resources can at least help bootstrap in the beginning. And then in itself, some of those things would happen over time, which is building those relationships. But I think in the beginning, it's very important to have a local team. And even if the founders are not from there, I think it's extremely important. And then the second part is nowadays, because we're living more and more in a globalized setting and a globalized world, it is not that uncommon to see founders who are starting companies in markets where they're not necessarily from. I mean, the US is a big example of a place where a lot of founders in the US are actually not from the US and are international. And that's one of the biggest things that we're promoting in the US to keep going. Now, that being said, the US is a little bit more of a different market in terms of its maturity. So, of course, the competitive landscape has gotten to a point where it's kind of a fair game for everyone, and we're really trying to empower founders of all origins. Developing economies are a little bit different because there is also an incentive to empower local founders, because that's incredibly important to be able to actually get local talent to be building in their local market. So I don't think that it's a problem, but I think that it is something to be mindful of, especially in the way that you build your team.
If I may just add, quickly. So Africa has been quite welcoming to foreign founders, actually. And you might have seen that actually a lot into the ecosystem. Just one thing. So as I said, don't take Africa as a country, because every country, every region has a specific thing. You're very welcome to any country. I would recommend to go through a local partner, because the regulation is not the same. You definitely would need a little push in every country it is. So I think there are some bumps that you have to go through, but it's completely possible. Again, as I recommend, start with an SPV in the local country. Perhaps get a local partner, get to see everything, how's it going, and then structure it in a way that will actually make sense. Just when you go through SPVs, because I have a lot of companies who did this before, don't give the partner more than exactly. You need to consolidate that at your headquarters in the end. I think the opportunity is huge, specifically for media. I don't know what else. Perhaps we can meet, afterwards. Exactly, but just know that the opportunity is quite big there, and don't underestimate the bumps, the regulatory bumps that you might not find somewhere else. You would find them actually in the continent. So I would recommend also to go through a startup acceleration program that is African, so they can actually channel you directly. And I think you're very welcome. I'm quite excited to have you.
I think you got yourself a nice little mini advisory session right there. This is what GITEX is about. Smart. I'm afraid we're out of time. I wanted to thank Marem and Aya. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for being here. And it's wonderful to always be on a panel where I get to speak with other women in the ecosystem, especially two women who are writing checks. So all the best with what you're doing for the future of Africa's startup investment. A round of applause, please, for our panelists today. Thank you.